You're welcome to the Friends at Work podcast with Toye, a podcast about emotional intelligence at work. Hi, this is Toye. On this episode, I have Diana Smith, the principal of the Washington Latin Public Charter School. That's a mouthful. But the school does exceptional and unique things in education. We talk about the charter of the school and how they're bringing quality education to the public space. The level and quality of education that students are receiving there is comparable to education that students will receive in schools that they pay $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 for. And I also want to thank her for being patient through the recording process, because about 30 minutes into the first part of our recording, my recorder just went dead. The recording, we don't have the recording anymore. And she was gracious enough to let us start the conversation again. And I'm very grateful for her time. We talked about very important things in education, her experience, 35 years teaching. It's nothing to sneeze at. And as an administrator, she talked about arming teachers and the philosophy of learning and thinking tools. This is a really packed episode, and I'm sure you'll find significant value in it. Here's our conversation.
My name's Diana Smith. I'm the principal at Washington Latin Public Charter School, where I've been for 10 years.
Wow. So can you tell us how you ended up in the Washington Latin Public Charter School?
I'd been teaching and was an administrator in several schools, independent schools, private schools, prior to coming here. One day I decided that it was time for a change, and that if I wanted to call myself a teacher, capital T teacher, that I really needed to learn how to teach students who didn't have the same kind of advantages. And so I knew I really wanted to be in a public school, but I also wanted to be in a small school, and that meant probably going public charter. For those who don't know, charter schools are public schools. Students are chosen by lottery, and there is no selection. There is not selection criteria. So I wanted also to be in Washington because I like this city, and I came to Washington, and then I found Washington Latin, which in many ways was perfect because I also have a degree in classics and believe in the power of Greek and Latin to feed the soul.
So what is the charter of this school?
The charter, the tagline for the school is a classical education for the modern world, and we talk a lot about what that classical part means, but what it really means is taking the lessons of the ancients, and by ancients I mean Greece, Rome, but also I'm right across where we are right now from a mural that is in Arabic, so it's also that classical tradition, and we offer Chinese, so it's the classical Chinese tradition as well. But it's to take the lessons of the ancients and help students achieve a fuller humanity, which sounds probably squishy to those that like to categorize education by numbers on tests. We believe that students need to learn the ability to think for themselves. I think the important word on that is autonomy. It's a good Greek word meaning self-rule, and we believe that students need to learn how to be able to govern their own destinies, and so that's really what the mission of the school is.
Okay, so you said Chinese, you mentioned also Arabic. How many languages are taught in the school?
All the students are required to take Latin in the middle school and halfway through the high school, and then they can have a choice of studying French, Chinese, Arabic, and then we also do offer ancient Greek.
Wow.
So it's really unusual.
Yeah. That sounds pretty unusual.
Yep, it's very unusual, although not unusual
nice.
For the privileged. A lot of private schools offer this, but we're very unusual in terms of a public school that has a rich curricular offering.
Nice. So, how is the school going about accomplishing its charter? I know we've talked about language, we talked about offering privilege to students who otherwise would not have access to this privilege. Is there any other way, or are there any other ways in which the charter is accomplished with the students?
So I think probably the most important feature of our school to know about is the size.
Okay.
So we have 700 students in the building we're in right now, grades 5 through 12, and about 350 from grades 5 through 8, and 350 in the high school. It's particularly in the high school a small number. Because a lot of students want the sort of classic seen in Hollywood experience of high school, with the long corridors, with the metal lockers and the football team and the whole deal. It's not the kind of high school we are, and that comes out of choice. Because we believe that students need not to be anonymous. I think anonymity is a big problem, and students want to hide, and especially in their teenage years. They often, I tell parents almost every day, do not let your teenager go into their room and slam the door. Get in there with them and talk to them. So the small size is a really important feature of our school.
So speaking of anonymity, earlier today the news came out that there was a shooting in St. Mary's County, and this was carried out by a student who was also killed, and a couple of people were hurt. What are your thoughts about dealing with this kind of situation as an administrator and as an experienced teacher? What do you think can be done about this situation?
Well, I'll tell you one thing I don't think should be done, and that's giving me a gun. Not because I couldn't handle it. I think I probably could. But if you start arming school people, you'll ruin the sense of a school. I think of schools as sacred spaces in many ways, and to put guns in them is as odd to me as it would be to arm priests if we start having more shootings in churches. What do I think? What I think is what I wrote to the parents. I worry. I worry every day. This is a major burden that any leader of a school bears these days. I think there are some things that we have done and that I think people need to continue to do, but this isn't always going to stop everything. I've said it before in groups of people when they've asked me. I think the people in Parkland did lots right. And, of course, we focused on what was wrong, but they've done a lot right in order to prevent that, to try to prevent that. So I think kinds of things you can do. First of all, every child in this school has what we call a go-to adult. And that person is an adult who they can speak to if they're feeling discouraged on a given day. I know all 700 names and I know all 700 students here. Some administrator or teacher is greeting them every morning when they come and looking at them. It would not be unusual for us to be radioing to each other saying so-and-so looks like he had a bad night. We need to check in. So you've got to be hyper vigilant, especially in high schools. Well, not only, but certainly in grades 7 through 12, of the moods and the fluctuating moods of teenagers. It's a volatile period, and you just have to be aware of that. The other thing I think schools should do is they need to figure out how to provide mental health services within the school for the students. In many of the schools I've been in, the counselor has been the last person anybody wanted to see. That is not true here. I have 6 mental health counselors, and people go. We have managed to normalize going to the counselor. And I think that's an important issue. I believe a great deal in the power of therapy for young people. I think those are two things that we can do. Clearly, background checks and all of that would be helpful. But so, too, is just some good old-fashioned vigilance that used to be provided by the neighborhood, where the neighbors would say, John seems off today. What's going on? And that's what we're trying to provide here in a small school, is essentially the vigilance over a kid and the surrounding a child with love that would come from a neighborhood.
So you're creating a local neighborhood in the school, so to speak.
Yeah, and that's what's unusual about charter schools, is because we draw from all 8 wards of this city. So our demographics here, which is very unusual, are the same as the demographics of the city itself. Where this is an integrated school, which is not the case in many of the other charter schools in this city.
So I'm going to switch gears a bit and talk about parent-teacher relationships and dealing with all the other people within the school system. How does a young teacher, say, deal with a troubling or challenging situation with any one of these constituents?
So, the first thing I'd say to the young teacher is be patient. You will get older.
Hopefully that's a good thing.
Yeah, we are so anti-wisdom these days in society. But you do gain experience as you age, and you do gain perspective. And I think probably that's the thing that has allowed me to deal with what are very difficult situations in schools. There's no question. There are a lot of emotions. I've seen people who run companies brought to tears because of their children and something that happened to their child. So you get a lot of emotions running high in schools, and you have the trinity of kid, home, and school that you have to learn how to negotiate. So for the young teacher, the thing I tell all my young teachers: do not take it personally. Do not take it personally. If a student walks in a foul humor and says something to you that he or she shouldn't, it doesn't necessarily mean it's about you. And the younger you are as a teacher, the more you take personally the comments that come from others. But just to give you an example of a kind of challenging situation, I had one today that will help, I think, listeners realize that there is no guidebook to dealing with these kinds of issues, but the best thing you can do is learn the lessons of a good liberal arts background. I really do believe in it, and I do believe that a lot of those years that I spent reading literature, frankly, gave me the wisdom to know how to deal with some of these scenarios. So today a father walked in and said that his son had told him that at a recent party, another child had threatened him with a knife. So there's a scenario, right, that is I encounter right in the middle of the day, unannounced, didn't know this was going to happen. You've got a couple things going on there. You've got an incident that is off campus, right? So you have the whole issue about how far does the school reach. And the father was actually asking me to intervene with his child and the child who served the threat. The interesting thing is I brought the kid in to meet with me and his father at the same time. And then you had the interesting dynamic of the boy having told his father perhaps something that he then didn't tell me, and the father hearing what the boy had said. It was interesting to me that at the end of this, after I had listened to all sides, the father, and I had dismissed the boy, the father had said to me afterwards, I was surprised at how much you honored what my son had to say. And you know what? That's what it means to be in school. This was a middle schooler, and these children have a side in all of this, and I think it's really important not to run right over the top of them, which is what parents sometimes want to do and school teachers want to do, right? We just want to run in and fix it. And you have to really, really listen hard to what people are telling you. If we could figure out how to teach people how to listen, I'd know how to really run a school. People don't know how to listen.
It's a hard skill, and it's a
exhausting skill.
I hear experience in that.
Yeah, and you must do it too, right? It's what you do as well.
So this is Friends at Work podcast, right? And I want to ask how you've dealt with hiring staff and dealing with sometimes disagreeable colleagues, because the workplace dynamic, it's one thing particularly in the school, it's one thing to be a great teacher in class and deal with the challenges that the students bring. It's another thing to have a hostile work environment that makes it even difficult. You feel like you're fighting a war on two fronts. And I'm not saying that particularly about this school, but I'm speaking generally from just teaching and generally dealing with difficult situations. How, if you've ever experienced that kind of situation or you've seen this sort of thing play out, how does a teacher deal with such a thing?
So where the environment amongst the faculty is not healthy, is that
Yes,
what you're asking
yes.
about? Yeah, okay. I feel very strongly about this, although people tell me I feel strongly about everything. When I first came here, that was about a year and a half into this school. And one of the first things I knew I had to do was to create a faculty culture. I think this is one of the mistakes that a lot of educational reformers are making right now, is they have forgotten that the faculty is a major, if not the major in many ways, constituency in a school. They set the tone. They're there on the front lines, if you want to use that unfortunate metaphor that people use. And it's really important to develop a faculty culture. So let me explain how we've done that, and then I can talk a bit about what you do when there are disagreements. You develop that culture first by giving them autonomy, another mistake that a lot of reformers are making. They really want to make schools what I call teacher-proof, which means that there is a cookie-cutter curriculum for every kid that will somehow transcend what they think is the mediocrity of some teachers. So if you don't give good people autonomy, though, to shape a curriculum the way they want, you won't get good teaching. So that's the first thing that I believe in. In our curriculum, a quarter of what we allow a teacher to do is what I call just teacher choice, just because you're fascinated by it. So I have a teacher who's teaching astronomy right now just because he actually is fascinated by that. So autonomy for the faculty is important for a culture. The other is quite simple. I mean, every business, every workplace knows this. People need to get together outside of school. Breaking bread together, I believe a great deal in. It's important. So I host gatherings at my house for the faculty that are usually around also a topic of some kind. These are intellectual people. They've come to school because they love ideas, not because they want to see education as an assembly line, but it's because they love ideas. So I think, and the other thing that I've learned, probably too late, but is that faculty, especially at this level, so by that I mean K-12, are really quite fragile people in terms of egos. They're doing a job that they don't think society really admires. They're not always making very much money to do it. The children can treat them badly. The parents sometimes beat up on them. And so I think you often get a very insecure group of people. And then you got to remember that, like actors and actresses, all day long, they're on stage asking the audience how they're doing. And so that performing aspect can, they're being vulnerable all day long. So you've got to remember that when you're working with faculty. Is first, you've got to love them for those vulnerabilities, right? And you've got to love them for their commitment to probably the most difficult job on the planet. And then you've got to create an environment that doesn't nitpick with them. Now, You can create prima donnas by all of this coddling, and some of your best people get to be very difficult. But I don't let faculty speak about each other behind each other's backs. That is another thing that undermines quickly. And I also don't let them, or I counsel them not to, let the kids criticize one of them in front of another faculty member, which is something that's very easy to do. It's a cheap thing to do to encourage the kids to listen to them as they criticize another faculty member. That creates that. I keep the faculty room as small as possible so that they can't go in there and complain about one another. And you know what? We've managed to create a very positive adult culture here.
That's great. I like the sound of that.
Yeah.
So, who are your women heroes? This is Women History Month, right? And
it is.
I mean, I have to throw that in there somewhere. And so, who are your women heroes? Because I hear the passion of what you're saying, and what I've heard about what you're doing, and even what I've read about what you're doing. I'm pretty excited about it, and I can see that just talking with you here now, it's real. It feels very tangible. But have you been inspired by other women who have gone ahead of you, whether they're in the public space or just people privately who've inspired you to get to where you are, or who are currently still inspiring you to go forward?
Yeah, I went to a school that was run by crotchety single women, and they were wonderful. So clearly they've stuck in my head somewhere. But some public figures that maybe you'll be surprised to hear. One was in the New York Times 2 days ago, Joan Baez, who, if you're too young, you won't know. But she was a folk singer of the 1960s who sang with Bob Dylan. And you know what? She is still singing at 77. I love her music, and she cares so deeply about good causes. I really admire the passion. An educator who I have followed all my life, her name is Deborah Meyer. She started a number of schools in New York, one in Harlem, one in Mission Hill in Boston, and she's a practitioner of her craft as well as being just a very wise woman, so I have followed her. And then just a woman who I love for her graciousness is another old name probably for you, but Vanessa Redgrave, who's an actress. And so I've always wanted to be an actress. Mm-hmm. There is a form of teaching that is acting, as I said earlier, and being on stage. Certainly as a principal, I'm often in the public eye, and I'm talking a lot in terms of public speeches and that kind of thing. But she's a very gracious, now 80-year-old woman who I've always admired.
That's nice. I mean, I don't know half of these names.
Yeah, I figured that was the case. Yeah, you're forgiven.
Yeah.
Look her up, Joan Baez. Look her up.
We'll definitely look up those names. Just from what I know of what you're doing, I'm sure they'll be proud of what you're doing. Just being inspired by them.
You know what? Can we talk about that for a second? Inspiration. One of the things I've discovered about leadership that I think a lot of people just don't understand is that it needs to be inspiring. You need to help breathe life, right? I'm a Latin teacher, inspiro. It means literally to breathe life into someone. And a lot of leadership is not just keeping the trains running on time. That's clearly part of it. But a big part of it is helping others see what's good and right in the world that you believe in.
I need a moment to just take that in. All right. As we round off this conversation, I want to pose a question to you about critical thinking. So this is a pet peeve of mine.
Oh, me too. The phrase?
Yes.
Me too. I can't stand what is non-critical thinking?
But honestly, I mean, so it's a little different in how you explain it. Mm-hmm. It's thinking, right? What bothers me is that it seems that not many people take time to process or have the mental tools to deal with the information that's coming to them and process it to make quality decisions. And even though in business you have a lot of critical thinking tools that are used to make good business decisions, or at least should help you make good business decisions, but the more I learn about philosophy, the more I read up on, read some philosophers, I find that you get to learn, at least I have learned a few things that I did not know ordinarily coming from an engineering background, even though that still teaches you certain things. But how to deal with, for instance, in today's society, fake news, how to look beyond the immediate news or the biases that you just being conscious of what your biases are and being able to deal with that. What mental tools or mental thinking tools would you like to see in your kids, in the students, manifested fully, as you're teaching them, and possibly even in the larger society as society is dealing with some of this very divisive conversations that are going on multiple levels in different subjects?
This whole fake news issue that we're having, students have got to be able to identify a source, figure out if it's reputable, sort through what would make an opinion plausible. So this is what we spend a lot of time on here, is trying to help them understand what is a facile idea, what is a deep idea, what is a defended idea, what is a superficial idea, what is an idea that's based on nothing as opposed to based on something. So in other words, you cannot have a valueless education. It just doesn't exist. So if you want a real education and you want to teach kids a real skill that is also a habit of mind, it's the ability to tell the phony from the real. And that is everywhere. Think about it. That's an assessment of people and whether or not somebody you meet is really just sort of a showman and not really saying anything under all the schmaltz, right? It's figuring out whether a book is worth rereading by whether or not it's substantial enough. So, I liken it in many ways, the mental skill to the habit of mind of nutrition that I'm losing the war on with our kids, which is be able to tell the difference between what the Doritos do for you as opposed to chicken, and you've got to help people figure that out. And unfortunately, we're living in a time when people think that education has nothing to do with training taste. I think education has everything to do with training taste, and I think taste can be trained. And I think I think young people deserve to hear that some things are more worth studying than others, and that some can be studied quickly and some take depth. So it's that whole range of issues of trying to decide what's worthy and what isn't. And it's not a popular statement. Because it implies that there is some expert who can tell the difference. But I don't know what we're doing in schools if we're not helping young people find their way through the thickets of nonsense that they're besieged by right now. So I feel even more strongly about this, obviously, since the advent of the internet.
Wow. Thank you so much. I have got a snippet of education from here. Do I get a small certificate that says that I've passed through?
You've passed.
Yay.
Yay. Way to go.
So thank you so much for being a guest on my show. I really, really appreciate it. I hope to have you on at some other point to maybe pick a topic outside teaching directly and just have a good conversation of maybe you can teach on philosophy.
Philosophy, I was just going to say. I started so young with that. So, yeah.
That's great.
Thanks.
Thank you so much. That's our episode for this week. Thanks for listening. Let's continue the conversation. You can reach me by email at myfriendtoye@gmail.com or on Facebook at Friends at Work Podcast. And you can follow me on Twitter at Friends at Work US. Join me next time for another episode of Friends at Work Podcast with Toye. Bye for now.